All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of adQALive. I'm Nick Sinitra, and today we're talking about Facebook automation. There's a couple of different tools and things that you can use in Facebook to automate different aspects of your media buying in Facebook. Particularly, we're going to talk about CBO, or campaign budget optimization. We're going to talk about dynamic creatives, and we're going to talk about automatic placements. We're going to go through these, talk about what they are, what it means, what are the pros and cons, should you use them, and all that jazz. So let's get started. So first off, let's talk about campaign budget optimization. What is that? So basically, what this is instead of setting your budgets at the ad set level for each individual audience, you are setting one budget for your entire campaign, and then Facebook ostensibly is going to allocate budget based on which different ad sets within that campaign are doing best, according to the optimization objective that you set. So should you use this? Potentially, right? It depends. There's different scenarios where, the obvious one is if you need to specifically control the spend of a given ad set, CBO, generally speaking, makes it difficult to do that, right? So as an example, if you are trying to maintain a split of 60-40, in terms of spend on prospecting and retargeting, using CBO is not going to allow you to control that with that degree of granularity. So if you do have a bunch of different prospecting ad sets, let's say in one campaign where you've got one that's interest-based and one that's based on behaviors and one that's maybe a lookalike, and you don't want to have to go adjust individual budgets on all those different ad sets day in, day out, then that could be good because you sort of have one total budget to use for prospecting, and at the end of the day, all you care about is getting the highest return on ad spend. So you're actually okay with letting Facebook make that determination. So that can work. Other examples of why you wouldn't want to use it, again, it really just has to do with cases where you need to have more fine control over how much a given ad set spends. So another example might be you've got different ad sets with different geo-targeting. Maybe one that's targeting the US, one that's targeting Canada or UK, and your client has said, hey, I only want 20% of my total media spend or my total purchase volume or what have you to come from this particular geographical region. Well, again, in CBO, if you just leave it up to Facebook, they're going to sort of optimize according to performance, but then you might end up with too much or too little spend in a particular bucket that you're trying to hit. So that's CBO. Now, let's talk about dynamic creatives. Dynamic creatives is actually a really interesting capability that was added to Facebook, I think within the last year. Not super new, not super old. It's it's been around for a little bit. So what is it? In contrast with the way that most people put ads in Facebook, you're sort of putting in multiple different components, and then Facebook is automatically going to combine these things, again, ostensibly to get you the lowest possible CPA or CPL or whatever it is you're trying to optimize for. So as an example, you could put in 2 different static images in a video, 3 different headlines, a few different descriptions, bodies, etc. CTA button, title, text, right? And what will happen is then Facebook's algorithms will automatically combine all the different possible permutations of those things. And in theory, again, not always in practice, but in theory, what should happen is that those combinations which have the best performance should get most of the media spend. Now, in practice, this does sometimes require a bit of babysitting. We've seen cases where you go look at a breakout in Ads Manager, and we'll talk more about this later. Maybe we can do a hands-on demo, but sometimes you'll go into Ads Manager and you'll go to the ad tab and you'll do a breakout by dynamic creative component. And then you go look at, let's say, images, right? And so you'll get this list and it will say, okay, here's all the different images that you have in your dynamic creative. And you'll see, maybe 80% of the spend goes to one of the images that's coming in at a $50 CPA, but then a lower amount, only a third as much, is going to one that has a $40 CPA. So the way it's supposed to work in practice isn't always how it works. The advantage is more around time savings, right? So if you think about how many different ads you'd have to run concurrently to test all those different things at once, you'd have to upload a lot of stuff. So really the beauty of it is you just put in basically the ingredients and then Facebook automatically combines them for you. So from a time-saving standpoint, there's definitely some value there. There's one other kind of cool thing here. So there's pitfalls and there's cool things about dynamic creatives, which I'll talk about. So a cool thing about dynamic creative is it's sort of maybe a bug and a feature in one. If you look at all the different combinations, right? If you find what is the one specific combination of creative and text and CTA button, if you go through and you segment and you say build a single Frankenstein ad that comprises all of those things, the best image, the best headline, the best description, and the best button, and you put that into one single ad and you run that on its own, not as a dynamic creative, but just as a standalone, you may find that that performs significantly worse than that same combination in the actual dynamic creative unit. And I have some different theories about this. It sort of hasn't been kind of fully confirmed or denied by Facebook, but my theory about this is that dynamic creatives have essentially a built-in mechanism to combat ad fatigue, in that a given person who sees your dynamic creative unit is not probably going to see the same exact combination more than one time, right? Whereas if you had one ad variation out there in the wild, that one, once somebody sees it more than a couple of times, the performance is going to diminish, right? Whereas showing a slightly different variation to a given person multiple times, if you've got a small audience, you're not seeing as much fatigue from the dynamic creative unit. It's also possible that Facebook is trying to incentivize people and is maybe giving you a little bit of a back end bump, or a little alley-oop on the CPM or something like that. So again, hard to know exactly what's going on under the hood, but that's one thing that we've observed. So yeah, in terms of bad things about it, yeah, again, like I said, it can be a little bit difficult to derive sort of qualitative insights from that, because if you try the same combination of things in different ad sets, you might get different outcome each time, right? So if I have 3 different ad sets, and one is prospecting that is interest based, and one of them is a 1% lookalike on previous purchasers, and one of them is based on some behaviors, right? And I run the same exact dynamic creative across all 3 of those audiences, and basically the components are the same in all of them. The outcome might be different in each one of those, and I think logically that makes sense. It's sort of a different persona that you're showing the ad to, so it makes sense that the ideal combination of components is going to be a little bit different from one ad set to the next. And again, the beauty of dynamic creatives is that A, it combats creative fatigue to a certain extent, and B, it saves you the trouble of having to go traffic dozens, if not hundreds, of different creative and copy combinations over time. So that's a cool one that we actually do like to use. We've seen good performance with that. Now, the final thing to talk about is automatic placements. Really, the theme, I should have started with this, but the theme of all these different things is ways that you can hand over more control, sort of let Facebook take the wheel, right, and allow them to kind of work their magic, right? Sometimes the magic is real, sometimes it's sort of a mixed bag. So again, in the case of CBO, generally a pretty cool feature, but depends on what you're trying to do. Dynamic creatives, overall pretty solid, right? Just with some idiosyncrasies there. And automatic placements, this is another one that it's sort of like your mileage may vary. It can be useful for testing out a new advertiser. I mean, we know from experience that most of the sort of the best performance you're going to get is going to be from the really no-brainer placements, standard news feed, right-hand side, just the basic ones, right? The oldest placements that have been around for a long time. The ones that can be a little bit more difficult to know in advance whether or not they'll work well would be things like Instagram stories, instant stories. Facebook Audience Network is a really big one that can work well. It's sort of one of those things like on Google Search Partners, basically, where the inventory is relatively inexpensive, right? Because it's out there in the wide web on the network, but quality can be lower, right? So depending on what you're selling and depending on what the audience is, running on Facebook Audience Network may not necessarily be a bad thing, but again, depending on your specific parameters, it may not be good. So as a best practice, I would usually recommend people to try automatic placements at first, and then later go into Ads Manager and segment by placement and see if there's anything that's just really sucking. And if it is, you can always go in and just manually cull it, right? And then over time, if you see that for whatever your particular client is, or if you're the advertiser yourself, whatever you're selling, if you start to see trend where, hey, I've tried 5 different prospecting audiences, and in every single one, the right-hand side placement just doesn't work. Well, now that's maybe a takeaway for you, qualitative insight that you can apply to your future campaigns. I'm just not going to include right-hand side in any of my future stuff. So that's basically it. This doesn't need to be a super long one today, but again, it was really just about ways that you can leverage the Facebook platform to allow their automation to kind of do some of the legwork for you. And again, we talked about CBO, or campaign budget optimization. We talked about dynamic creatives, what's good, what's bad, and we talked about automatic placements, whether or not you should use those and why. So hopefully you found that helpful. Just check real quick, see if anybody has any questions in the chat. Looks like no. I'm Nick Sinitra. As always, thank you for watching. Hope you learned something today. Hit us up in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that jazz, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.